There are moments in life that crystallize everything you thought you knew, shattering it into a million painful pieces. For me, that moment came standing in the hallway of the home I had lived in for 30 years, the home I had raised my son in. My son, Mark, stood before me, his face hard, devoid of the warmth I had known his entire life. His wife, Sarah, hovered behind him, her expression equally cold. "We don't want you here, Mom," Mark said, his voice flat, final. "Leave now, just like that?" The words hung in the air, heavy with a finality that went beyond simple rejection. It was an expulsion. A declaration that my own child saw me as an obstacle, a problem to be removed. Before we dive into the story, let us know where you're watching from in the comments below, and if you believe family should protect, not exploit each other. Hit that like button and subscribe for more. The raw shock of it stole my breath. My son, demanding I leave my home. But the truth was, this moment wasn't a sudden break. It was the inevitable, heartbreaking conclusion of months of subtle, then increasingly overt, manipulation. Until that frigid command, I hadn't fully grasped the depths of their plan, or the fact that my own family saw me as nothing more than a source of money. This wasn't just about a room in my house. It was about everything I had worked for, everything I had planned for my future. What I discovered next would force me to choose between a lifetime of family loyalty and my own self-preservation. My life had settled into a quiet rhythm after my husband, Thomas, passed away 2 years prior. We had built a comfortable life together, modest but secure. Thomas, a meticulous planner, had ensured I would be well provided for. The house was paid off, I had a healthy retirement fund, and a small but steady pension. I wasn't wealthy, but I was comfortable and independent. My world had shrunk a little with his loss, but it was peaceful. My son, Mark, and his wife, Sarah, lived about an hour away. Mark worked in marketing, Sarah was a graphic designer. They seemed to live just slightly beyond their means, always chasing the next upgrade, a newer car, a bigger TV, exotic vacations. They were charming, persuasive, and seemed to genuinely love me. I adored my grandchildren Lily and Tom, even though I didn't see them as often as I'd like. After Thomas died, Mark and Sarah became more present, initially seeming concerned and supportive. They'd visit on weekends, help with small repairs around the house, and take me out for lunch. I appreciated their attention. It eased some of the loneliness. Then came the suggestion that they stay for a few weeks. Their apartment lease was ending, they said, and finding a new place was proving difficult. It made sense. They could save money, and I wouldn't be rattling around the big house by myself. I readily agreed, happy to have the company and help. A few weeks turned into a month, then 2. The initial helpfulness faded. My routines were disrupted. They took over the kitchen, filled the spare rooms with their belongings, and their presence felt less like a visit and more like an occupation. Small requests started. Could I cover the internet bill this month? Their car needed a costly repair. Could I help out? They were family, they were struggling, and I had the means. Of course, I helped. It felt like I was doing what mothers do, supporting their children. I remember overhearing a conversation one evening shortly after they had moved in, maybe 6 weeks in. I was in the kitchen, making tea, and they were in the living room, thinking I was upstairs. Sarah's voice, low but clear, drifted in. Has she said anything about downsizing? This place is way too big for her alone. It would be perfect for us, especially with the kids. Mark mumbled something in response I couldn't quite catch, but then I heard him say, eventually, yeah. It's all set up anyway, inheritance-wise. Sarah laughed softly. Good. Because honestly, waiting feels like a waste. It was a fleeting moment, and I tried to dismiss it. They were just talking hypothetically, I told myself. Thinking ahead. It wasn't malicious. Not yet. That was my first inkling, a tiny chip in the foundation of my trust. I finished making my tea, my hands trembling slightly, and pretended I hadn't heard a thing. The feeling of unease grew over the next few months. It wasn't just the imposition on my space, or the financial requests that grew larger and more frequent, always framed as temporary loans or urgent needs that only I could solve. It was a shift in their attitude. There was an underlying current of entitlement, a subtle impatience. They talk about redecorating rooms, suggest structural changes to my house, and make comments about my spending habits, implying I was frivolous or irresponsible. It felt like they were already mentally spending my money and remodeling my home. The inciting incident, the moment the veil of family support was ripped away, happened unexpectedly. I needed a specific document, a copy of Thomas's life insurance policy, and I remembered putting it in a fireproof box in the back of my bedroom closet. The box contained important papers, birth certificates, marriage license, deeds, wills, financial statements. It was heavy, and I rarely moved it. When I pulled it out that day, something felt off. It wasn't locked. I was certain I always kept it locked. My hand trembled as I lifted the lid. The papers inside were slightly disarranged. My will, which left everything to Mark, was on top, though I usually kept it organized alphabetically. Next to it was a document I didn't recognize. It was a form related to property title, specifically a preliminary search report for my address, with Mark and Sarah's names listed as potential borrowers for a home equity line of credit. My blood ran cold. Why would they be applying for a loan using my house as collateral? I hadn't given them permission, hadn't even known they were considering it. My heart hammered against my ribs. I pulled out other documents. Bank statements were not where they should be. A copy of my investment portfolio summary was crumpled slightly at the edges. It hit me like a physical blow. They hadn't just been talking about the house. They had been going through my private financial documents, searching for ways to access my assets. The conversation I'd overheard months ago wasn't idle speculation, it was planning. The financial requests weren't temporary struggles. They were probes, tests of my willingness to give. They weren't visiting. They were casing the joint. Shock quickly gave way to a cold, hard fear. My own son and his wife were doing this. To me. In my own home. My initial reaction was disbelief, followed by a desperate attempt to rationalize. Maybe it was a misunderstanding? Maybe they needed the loan for something urgent and planned to tell me? But the secrecy, the rifling through my private box, the way they had insinuated themselves into my home, it all pointed to something far more calculated and sinister. I carefully put the documents back, making sure the loan form was hidden beneath the others. I relocked the box, double-checking the latch. My first defensive action was born from pure instinct, secure the most vulnerable points. That afternoon, I quietly contacted my bank and investment firm. I didn't explain everything, just said I wanted to review my accounts and ensure all security measures were up to date. I changed my online banking passwords and added extra layers of authentication. I also called a locksmith and scheduled an appointment for the next day, ostensibly to upgrade the locks on my external doors, a standard security precaution I would tell Mark and Sarah, something Thomas had always meant to do. I didn't mention the fireproof box. Not yet. I needed time to think, to understand. The days that followed were a masterclass in pretending. I smiled, I made polite conversation, I listened to their complaints about work and their subtle hints about money troubles. But inside, a quiet investigation had begun. I started keeping a small, spiral-bound notebook hidden in my bedside table. Every interaction, every suspicious comment, every time they asked about my finances or the house, I jotted it down with the date and time. I started taking photos with my phone, photos of documents left carelessly on tables. Once, a printed email about probate costs addressed to Sarah's personal email, photos of their mail if it related to my address or finances, photos of the mileage on their car when they claimed they needed gas money for a long trip that seemed suspiciously short. The pressure escalated. They started talking more openly about my options. Selling the house and moving into a smaller apartment was a frequent suggestion. "It's too much for you, Mom," Mark would say, shaking his head with feigned concern. All that upkeep. Sarah would chime in about how much money I could unlock by selling, freeing up capital for me to enjoy. Their idea of me enjoying it seemed to involve large, unexplained sums of money being transferred to their accounts. They began to subtly isolate me from friends and other family members, scheduling activities or creating minor dramas that prevented me from keeping social engagements. They discouraged visits from my few remaining close friends. "Don't want to bother Mom. She's tired," Sarah would say sweetly on the phone, just loud enough for me to hear. I knew I couldn't handle this alone. Gathering evidence felt necessary, but I needed to know what my rights were, what they could legally do, and what my options were. I needed professional help. I called the lawyer who had handled Thomas's estate. Mr. Harrison was kind, sharp, and discreet. I scheduled a consultation, telling Mark and Sarah I had a doctor's appointment. Sitting in Mr. Harrison's office, I laid out the situation: the unsolicited move-in, the increasing financial requests, the overheard conversations, the unlocked strongbox, the loan application related to my property, the subtle pressure to sell. As I spoke, showing him the copy of the loan document I had carefully photocopied, his expression grew grave. "Eleanor," he said, leaning forward, "this goes beyond simple overstaying your welcome. This looks like predatory behavior. They appear to be trying to leverage your assets, potentially without your full knowledge or consent." He explained legal concepts like undue influence, financial elder abuse, and adverse possession. Though he assured me the latter was highly unlikely in this scenario, it highlighted the danger of letting them stay indefinitely without a formal agreement. He outlined my options, starting with the simplest, politely asking them to leave. But given the evidence, he advised against a direct confrontation without legal backing. His recommended strategy was methodical and quiet: continue documenting everything, get legal counsel on retaining control of my property and finances, and prepare for the possibility that they would not leave willingly. He suggested reviewing my will and power of attorney immediately, potentially placing assets in a trust for added protection. He also advised sending a formal letter, drafted by him, giving them a clear timeframe to vacate. Armed with legal advice, I returned home, the quiet determination solidifying within me. The conversation with Mr. Harrison had been a turning point. I wasn't just hurt and scared anymore. I was strategizing. I followed his advice meticulously. I reviewed my will, ensuring it reflected my wishes precisely, adding clauses about conditions of inheritance to protect against future exploitation. I updated my power of attorney, designating a trusted friend, not Mark, as my agent. Mr. Harrison drafted a formal letter giving Mark and Sarah 30 days to vacate the premises, citing my need for privacy and space after mourning Thomas. He advised me not to deliver it myself, but to have it sent via certified mail and also delivered by a process server to ensure they received it officially. This was step one of my counter-strategy. While I waited for the formal letter to be drafted and sent, the pressure from Mark and Sarah intensified. They seemed to sense a shift in me, a new resolve beneath my placid exterior. Their requests became more insistent, laced with guilt and veiled threats. "We're family, Mom. We help each other out," Mark said one evening, his tone accusatory when I politely declined to give them money for a business opportunity. "Are you saying you don't trust us?" Sarah added, her eyes narrowing. This was my second micro-cameo, a direct confrontation where they revealed their true sense of entitlement. It wasn't about need, it was about perceived right. They believed they were owed my resources simply because they were my son and daughter-in-law. This hardened my resolve further. I wasn't just protecting my home and money, I was protecting my dignity and independence. They started creating fake emergencies. Sarah called late one night, hysterical, claiming Lily had a sudden, high fever and they needed money for the emergency room up front. I called their local hospital discreetly the next morning, pretending to be a relative checking on visiting hours. There was no record of Lily being admitted. It was a lie, a cruel manipulation using my grandchildren. That was the moment all lingering doubts vanished. They were not struggling, They were actively malicious. My decision was made. I would see this through, protecting myself at all costs. I would not be guilt, threatened, or lied to out of my security. The true smoking gun, the piece of evidence that gave me significant legal leverage, arrived a week later. I received a letter from my bank that wasn't addressed to me. It was addressed to Mark and Sarah, but sent to my address, likely because they had used it on their loan application. Curiosity overcoming caution, I opened it. It was a rejection letter for their home equity line of credit application, citing insufficient income and, crucially, indicating that the application listed me, Eleanor Vance, as a co-applicant and claimed that I would be residing with them permanently in the future. Attached was a copy of the application form, including a signature page for me that I had never seen before. It was a forgery. My signature, clumsily copied, was clearly visible. They hadn't just applied for a loan using my house. They had attempted to defraud the bank and me by forging my name and lying about my intentions. This wasn't just manipulation or entitlement. This was criminal activity. My hands shook, not with fear this time, but with righteous anger. They had crossed a line from exploiting my generosity to outright attempting fraud. I took the letter and the forged document directly to Mr. Harrison. His reaction was immediate and grim. "This changes things, Eleanor. This is evidence of attempted fraud and potentially elder abuse," he stated, his voice firm. "We can pursue criminal charges, but more importantly for your immediate situation, this provides significant legal leverage. We can file an emergency injunction based on this forgery to expedite the eviction process and protect your property title. This forged document was my legal weapon. It allowed me to move from a standard landlord-tenant issue, even an informal one, to a case involving fraud and potential financial elder abuse." Mr. Harrison quickly filed the necessary documents with the court. He requested an expedited hearing based on the evidence of forgery and potential financial harm. My counter-strategy was now in full motion. While Mark and Sarah were still expecting a polite request to leave, or perhaps ignoring the formal letter they had received, the process server confirmed delivery, I was preparing to legally remove them. I didn't tell them about the forged document or the court filing. I maintained my quiet demeanor, observing them, adding notes to my little book, waiting for the right moment. They remained overconfident, still making comments about their plans for the house, completely unaware of the legal storm gathering around them. Sarah even brought home swatches for painting the living room. The day the documents were served was anticlimactic in its execution, but devastating in its impact. I had arranged for a process server accompanied by a sheriff's deputy at Mr. Harrison's recommendation, given the potential for a negative reaction, to arrive at 9 a.m. on a Tuesday. I stayed in my bedroom, my heart pounding, but my mind clear. I heard the knock on the door, Mark's voice asking who it was, the rustle of papers, and then pandemonium. Mark shouting, Sarah screaming, demanding to know what was happening. I heard the deputy's calm, firm voice explaining the court order, an emergency notice to vacate the premises within 72 hours, citing the fraudulent loan application and forgery as grounds for immediate action. They hadn't expected this. They had anticipated a drawn-out process, maybe months of legal wrangling, time to build their own case or further manipulate me. The speed and the official nature of the service, the presence of law enforcement, utterly blindsided them. I walked out of my bedroom into the hallway, the same hallway where Mark would deliver his cruel demand just hours later. Mark and Sarah stood there, faces pale, eyes wide with shock and disbelief. The process server efficiently handed them their copies of the documents. Mark's eyes met mine. They were not filled with the entitled arrogance of moments before, but pure, raw panic. "Mom? What is this?" he stammered. This was my moment to maintain control. I didn't shout, didn't accuse, didn't revel in their distress. I simply looked at Mark, then at Sarah, my gaze steady. "It's exactly what it says, Mark," I said quietly, my voice steady. "You have 72 hours to leave." Sarah found her voice shrill and panicked. "You can't do this. We're your family. How could you? After everything we've done. Everything you've done? I repeated, a touch of ice in my tone. Going through my things? Forging my signature? Lying about my health and intentions? That's not doing for me, Sarah. That's trying to steal from me. Mark started to bluster, mentioning inheritance, how they were supposed to get the house anyway. This was the truth revealed, their greedy plan laid bare in their panic. The deputy cleared his throat pointedly, reminding them this was a legal matter. Their desperation tactics followed swiftly after the officials left. Texts, calls, voicemails, a torrent of abuse, guilt-tripping, and threats. How I was a cruel, heartless mother. How I was ruining their lives. How I would regret this. How I would die alone. I didn't respond. Mr. Harrison had advised me to block their numbers after receiving the threats. The next day, the day Mark told me to leave, was their final, pathetic attempt to regain control. They must have thought if they could just force me out, physically remove me, they could somehow nullify the court order, or at least buy time. They stood in the hall, blocking my path, faces set in that hard, cold determination. We don't want you here, Mom. Leave now. Instead of arguing, instead of crumbling, I looked at them, at the strangers wearing my son and daughter-in-law's faces. I saw the greed, the betrayal, the utter lack of humanity. My heart ached, a dull, throbbing pain for the family I had lost, the people I thought I knew. But the fear was gone, replaced by a quiet, resolute strength. I didn't need to argue. I didn't need to plead. My lawyer had handled the legal battle. My evidence had spoken for itself. And I had one more card to play. I nodded slowly. All right, Mark, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I'll leave. Their expressions flickered with surprise, perhaps thinking they had won. But as I turned, not towards the front door, but towards the study, I added, but not for long. I went into the study, opened the safe where I had put the forged document and bank letter, and retrieved a folder. I then walked calmly to the front door, past their still confused faces, and stepped outside. A car was waiting at the curb. It wasn't a taxi, it was an investigator Mr. Harrison had hired, who also happened to be an off-duty sheriff's deputy. I got into the car. We didn't drive away immediately. We waited. Less than an hour later, as the 72-hour deadline loomed, a moving truck pulled up, accompanied by another sheriff's deputy. They watched from the car as the deputies knocked, presented the final court order for enforcement, and oversaw Mark and Sarah being formally removed from the premises, their belongings packed by the movers I had arranged, and placed in storage that would only be accessible once they paid the fees I would pursue legally. The truth of the forgery and their attempted fraud had, by now, begun to circulate amongst the wider family via the necessary legal filings. There was no one for them to turn to for support. Their blatant attempt to steal from their elderly mother had alienated even the most enabling relatives. In the immediate aftermath, my home felt eerily quiet, scrubbed clean of their toxic presence. The court confirmed the expedited eviction, and my property title was secured. The legal process regarding the attempted fraud and recovery of funds they had taken was ongoing, but Mr. Harrison was confident. Mark and Sarah faced not only the shame of their actions and ostracism from the family, but also the real possibility of criminal charges and significant financial judgments against them. They had gambled on my love and my age, assuming I would be easy to manipulate or too afraid to fight back. They were wrong. I spent that first evening alone in my house, the quiet settling around me like a balm. I changed the locks again, ensuring only I had keys. I established clear boundaries, formalizing the no-contact order Mr. Harrison had advised. My life was irrevocably changed. The naive trust one had once had was gone, replaced by a cautious wisdom. There would be no reconciliation, no mending of these ties. The betrayal ran too deep. But as I sat in my own living room, in my own chair, in my own home, I felt a profound sense of peace. I had protected myself. I had stood up for what was right. I was safe, independent, and stronger than I ever knew. Thanks for watching till the end. If you enjoyed this story, give this video a like if you haven't already, and subscribe for more stories about standing up for yourself.